Hello, Shudderek here. Today, I'm going to be making a video going over best in slot gear for Havoc, and kind of more general than that, I want to go over what best in slot is, why best in slot lists are actually bad, and I don't recommend following them, and what true best in slot is compared to just kind of what works. So, start. I have pulled up here my Wowhead guide, and this has multiple best in slot lists. Now, the reason that I'm saying best in slot lists are bad is these are the first thing that people jump to, and when they see a best in slot item, they take that as that's just what I should run, period. I only want that. And put it bluntly, that's just not how tier works. In a given tier, you almost never will get your full BiS. That's just not a reasonable assumption to make, and for something to be the best, it also has to be on the highest item level. I know there will be cases where I look at someone's character and they're like, hey, I need to be doing more damage, and I'm looking at their gear and they have multiple heroic pieces on, and they're just like, well, yeah, that's my BiS. That isn't how that works. You don't drop item level for best in slot gear, and just because something is on the BiS list doesn't mean it's the best item for you to use on your character. A best in slot list basically is, while it is supposed to be the best gear you could get in the whole season as a combination, even changing a single piece in that list will change around what is best to use. So, for example, if instead of this ring of perpetual conflict, you have a ring that's more mastery heavy than crit heavy, that will change what you want in every other single slot. Because there are so many items that are so close to each other, and outside of true BiS items, you're really just hitting a kind of stat ratio. So think of it as there is going to be a certain percentage of your stats that should be going into crit and mastery, and then a much lower percent that goes into haste and eventually versatility. Sims are the best way to determine that, and Top Gear Sims will always give you the right answer, where it's going to be different character to character, and the more gear you have, slightly different that could be as well. That's going to be the first thing I'm going to say to keep in mind, is best in slot gear does not apply to every slot. There's not a true best in slot list, and while we have what can be the best, version of that we can show, because people very much like best in slot lists, and a lot of more casual players will not ever look further than this. This isn't the best thing to follow. Now, I did mention a couple times true best in slot. That is a thing that exists. True best in slot is items like, right here, the Jastor Diamond. Items that have effects that make it so nothing else can replace them, those are true best in slot. When we're thinking of that, we're going to be thinking of specific trinkets. There's always best trinkets for the season. Sometimes one of them is slightly interchangeable, but almost always you have best in slot trinkets for certain scenarios or items with special effects. Jastor's Diamond is one of these items. It gives you a significant amount of extra stats, and it gives extra stats to, whoever's in your group, because it will also give your stats to somebody else every so often, but it's all a bonus. This is on top of it being a fully budgeted item, and that's just gravy on top. Same with special proc weapons. Capo's Molten Knuckles is another one that we have this tier. Just a great item in general. This is also absolute best in slot. Again, it can be beat based on item level. A heroic Capo's in your main hand is going to be worse than a mythic main hand, period. This tier, because it's tuned well enough, heroic Capo's in your offhand is better than a mythic offhand, but you need to sim for your character. So, even if something is true BiS, that doesn't defeat that item level can still beat it. But at same item level, it will be BiS. So, when we're thinking of true BiS, that's really going to come down to a few things. One, that's going to be items that we can dinar, like Jastor's Diamond, Capo's Molten Knuckles, and then trinkets like Seaforium Pacemaker. You want to run in basically every scenario, and situationally, I have Kazan for longer raid fights, possibly a couple M+ dungeons. On shorter raid fights, you might want House of Cards or the Mega Magnet. And in Mythic Plus, something out of Mechanical Core Amplifier, Suspicious Energy Drink, or House of Cards. All of that is being paired with your Pacemaker, which you pretty much just use all the time. That is absolute best in slot. But when it comes to the rest of the items and everything else that you're seeing here, you're really just going off of you want to stack crit and mastery. Your sim will let you know whether you want more crit or mastery. You can always change your stats around a little bit based off of your gems and your ring enchants. And outside of that, you're just going to have a little bit of haste and a little bit of verse. Not that much. Some of it's going to come from your tier. You'll get a bit of haste from Jastors, but you really don't need to focus on those stats at all. And what that does mean is, again, if you have different gear from what is set up in this BiS list, for example, say you have tier gloves instead of having the mastery crit gloves, that means you're going to have versatility on your character that wouldn't be coming from somewhere else normally, and that might change your item decisions in other slots. So it's just good to keep in mind that even though the BiS lists exist, you don't want to go for specifically every single item on it and that item only, because you're not going to get everything on Mythtrack and wear it all by the end of the season necessarily, and in the meantime there's likely better items that you could be using. Best to always just use Droptomizer and Top Gear to look at the items that are good for you, and this also applies to crafting. It's the same thing where a lot of time people ask me what they should craft, and they're like, well, like, the BiS list has bracers and, you know, a weapon, or it might have cape. This is based on the embellishments that are being run as well. In M+, you don't want Ascendants, but in Raid you do. Bracers are good as a crafted item, for example, because they have the lowest stat budget. Out of every item that you can have equipped on your character, bracers give the least stats. So they're good in a full BiS setup because you lose 3 item levels on your weakest slot. When you're crafting earlier in a season, or even depending on the items you have on your character, if you have heroic items in a certain slot or poorly statted pieces, those are going to be better to replace every single time. In the long run, you'll eventually have the sparks to craft in those BiS slots if you do get towards that that BiS setup that you're looking for. But earlier in a season, you should really go for a bigger upgrade. You don't want to craft the weakest option possible as your big upgrades early on. The reason we use those slots is because minor downgrade is best to go in the weakest slots. When you're looking at full 678 gear right now, as of next week with the item level bump, it'll be 684, and then crafted items will go from 675 to 681, 3 lower. Now, I've just done a lot of rambling here about how best in slot lists are bad, why best in slot isn't something to always follow. But the main thing to keep in mind, and really just looking at it here, is again, best in slot. When it comes down to it, those true best in slot pieces that you don't want to replace, you're just kind of looking at Jastor Diamond, Capo's Molten Knuckles, Pacemaker, and then other various trinkets are used situationally. Now, when we look at everything else, there are replacement items like the Undermine Merc Dogs tags. These are the BOE that you have to buy. You can get, the neck out of Dark Flame Cleft. That's high crit, low verse. It's not as good, but it's runnable. And you could just craft a neck that's crit mastery. It will not give you as much crit, which is where it is going to be worse, but it's not going to cost you millions of gold. And other items like the best in slot boots. Any boots can be thrown into the catalyst and turned into crit mastery, so these are all really minor. And having very minor stat swaps from this BiS list is going to be a very small drop, because all the stats get so close when it's optimized that changing from this, we're talking within like 0.1%. So if you're ever worried, like, hey, is my gear why I'm not doing damage? Are my stats wrong? Like, do I need 2% more crit instead of the 4% extra mastery I have? The answer to that almost always is no. There's minor optimizations to make. Usually we're talking within 0.2%, something like that, when you're going over small optimizations. if you're fixing, like, you have a haste verse ring, the absolute worst thing you could have equipped, there's going to be a big upgrade going to a crit mastery ring. But in most cases, if you have a piece that has crit verse instead of crit mastery, the loss is minimal and it doesn't really have much of an impact. And I think in general, people should spend a lot less time worrying about their gear, just run and follow their sims, and you're good with that. Focus more on your gameplay. That's always going to give you better results than fretting over the minor parts of your gear that are just really small min-maxes. That's really everything for today. Thank you for watching.